Good morning, everybody. It's time for another episode of Existential Ambiguity. You know, we're going to have to change that name. It sounds like we don't know what we're talking about. Well, what is that existential ambiguity? It's sort of...
I don't know. Maybe it's
kind of like...
impermanent. Tomorrow it'll be something else.
No, actually, we have a much better idea for a podcast. This is Buddha Vāngsa, by the way.
And Dhamma-vāngsa.
The Vāngsa brothers. And we're here to give you a guided tour through the Buddha's teaching. But really, we have a much better idea now of what we're doing. And we call it the luminous mind. The idea of the luminous mind is to generate or pass on to you the eye of the teaching, the eye of the Dhamma eye, the stainless Dhamma eye. And that is, of course, a comprehensive view of the Buddha's teaching.
A context that uses you and creates a luminous mind.
Yeah. Well, we have to explain what a context that uses you is.
You mean these people haven't been following us since the beginning?
Well, theoretically, they should have been, but they most likely have only begun to listen to us. And probably after listening to this, they're not going to listen to any more.
Well, we are starting to make more sense than we were.
I think so, yeah. So why don't we explain, because this goes back almost all the way to the beginning of our work together when we were studying leadership. And the idea is that when you're a leader, when you're in charge, when you're responsible, you don't have time to think. You have to be the master of whatever it is you're leading, to the extent that when something comes up, you simply respond. Okay, now how do you get to that point? And I had all kinds of insights from my musical career. I became an expert instrumentalist and performer and composer.
It's not studying other masters and other leaders.
No.
It's mastering yourself in practice.
Yes. And that means your knowledge of your field has to be so deep and so trained into your being that it's automatic. You don't have to think about it. When something comes up, you don't react. You respond from a very deep place in yourself, appropriately and effectively. And how you do this is by creating a certain context.
With an unlimited opportunity set. Yes.
You can be whatever you have to be or do whatever you have to do to accomplish your purpose.
We don't mean that in a Machiavellian sense.
Right.
We don't mean do whatever you need to do and step all over everyone else.
Well, let's talk about context for a minute, because this is important in the context of our work with the Buddha's teaching. Context is defined as, there's two main definitions. The parts of something written or spoken that immediately precede and follow a word or passage and clarify its meaning. That's the common meaning of context. Like what we're saying here, everything we're saying here is in the context of the Buddha's teaching. But another meaning is the circumstances that form the setting for an event, statement, or idea, and in terms of which it can be fully understood and assessed. That's a very good definition of context. I really like that.
The meaning is derived from the context.
Not only that, the understanding and the assessment, the value. Some people take the Buddha's teaching as a religion. Some people take it as a curiosity, like a hobby.
Some as a position designation.
Yes. But others take it as their life and soul, deeply committed to it, and they live it every moment of every day. That is the kind of context that's necessary to actually get the value of the Buddha's teaching. Because then you see how it affects everything, everywhere. And when a situation comes up, you respond out of that context.
You take it as something to be realized.
You don't think about it. You don't think, what would Buddha do?
No.
You simply respond out of that consciousness, out of that context, spontaneously and effectively.
Without the I.
Yeah, there's no need for I.
I is in the way.
I is certainly in the way of getting the Buddha's teaching.
And in the way of responding efficiently to any situation.
Like we use the example of an expert musician, since at least I'm very familiar with that situation. When you're up there playing, you don't have time to think. Well, let's see, the next chord is going to be... By that time, it's past. It's gone. You've missed it. If you're reading the chart, you'll never catch up.
No.
You have to master the music to the extent that you become the music. The music itself is present within you. It's not external.
You're just focused on the expression, what you want to transmit.
Yes.
Freely.
You don't even think about which fingers you're going to use on which keys and all of that. That's all completely automatic. You're sitting in the feeling. You're sitting in the mood. And you're expressing this mood. It's really a wonderful state.
But talking about how that state is really impossible. You can't really explain how that state of being is to a person who hasn't experienced it.
No, you have to take them through a drill. And the drill is that you immerse yourself in a particular subject intensively until you get it. Okay? And getting it is not something that can be explained. It's like a joke. When you hear a joke, a horse walked into a bar.
Horses don't walk into bars.
Now, just wait a minute, Sonny. Hold your horses. That means the first line of the joke is something you have to take without coming to a value judgment. You take in the first line of the joke, and then the setup, and then here comes the punchline. 42.
If you're busy thinking about the assumptions of the first line of the joke, you won't get the joke.
You won't get the joke. You'll say, well, that's illogical, Captain. Then, everybody else is laughing, rolling on the floor, and Spock is going, I'm sorry, Captain, your logic is faulty.
Similarly, in the Buddha's teaching cannot be understood until you have duplicated it and tried it out in your own experience.
It's an experience. It's like a joke. You have to take the assumptions and use them, immerse yourself in them until you have a certain experience. And after that experience, you get it. And it can't be explained more than that. And the reason it can't be explained more than that is something that we just arrived at about 4 o'clock this morning in meditation. That our language, English, and every other language of which we are aware, including Sanskrit and Pali and every language that we know of on this planet, assumes the existence of a self, assumes the existence of an I, a person, a personality. And of course, the purpose of the Buddha's teaching is to get rid of that.
To see that is fabrication.
So once the I and the self and the person and all of that is out of the way, what is that experience like? Well, I'm sorry, our language doesn't cover that. I wish it did. I wish there was a way I could explain to you.
So that you would have an experience of it.
Yes, but it's not possible because I and self and so on are symbols. I wish I could explain it to you, but I can't. They're abstractions. They're not experiences. They stand for something else that you do experience. So I can say Nibbana, Nibbana, Nibbana all day long, but that will not give you the experience of Nibbana, of the cessation of suffering, of the extinction of I, mine, and self, which are the causes of suffering. What that will do is simply make you think you understand it, but you really don't understand it because just like a joke, you didn't get it. You didn't have the experience.
I could say punch in the face. It's just an abstraction until you experience it.
Right, like Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Similarly, everybody has an I until they attain an experience where they don't have an I. And we can't explain what's there. There simply is no language to cover it.
Yeah.
So, we are left with the only other alternative is to explain to you a procedure that, if followed, will give you that experience.
Yeah.
That's really the only other alternative there is.
Yeah, when people try to describe Nibbana, they talk about the negatives, what's not there, but they don't talk about what's there, because that can't be explained.
And so it seems to look like nothingness. Or
it's boring.
Yeah, it sounds really boring.
Or really scary, like dying.
Like the end of everything. But it's not. We can tell you there is something there, but...
The end of everything you can talk about.
The end of... that's a very good definition. Yeah, I like that. It's the end of the stuff that we have symbols to talk about. Because of the construction, because of the nature of our languages. Short of inventing a new language, I don't know what we could do about that. And that would still leave us in the same position where nobody would understand it because they didn't have the experience that corresponds to the symbol. So, if I say a horse with horns, you haven't had that experience. You can imagine it, but you can't experience it.
No.
Until you do, you won't really understand the meaning of what I say.
Well, the closest you can get is if someone has some kind of skill that not everyone has, and they try to communicate that to the people around them. You know how hard that is.
Yeah, we were making the example of the musician, a world-class athlete, for example.
Punch in the face.
Yeah, a world-class boxer. They have a hard time explaining what they do or how they do it.
Yeah.
It's pretty much you just have to get up there and try it. And then you can get to the point where you have the experience. Why? Because that level of experience, that level of functioning, that level of skill, that level of competence requires you to give up your reflexive thinking and simply go into the immediate experience without any computation, without any thought, without any abstraction.
You most certainly have to let go of your reflection.
Oh, yeah, that's, yeah. Any kind of action demands that.
Reflection is like thinking about the scales you're going to play. Thinking about where are they on the keyboard.
It's way too slow to do any kind of performance.
And the Puthujjana's reflexion would also be in the way. But I have a feeling that the Arahant's reflexion is not in the way of dealing with experience.
The Arahant's reflexion is described by the Buddha in one sutta, whereas the Puthujjana sees X, then sees X as X, and then conceives in X, and so forth. The Arahant sees X as X, and then does not conceive in X, does not conceive from X, does not conceive X is for me.
And does not delight in X.
Right. So actually, that is the equivalent of turning off all those layers of reflexion with an X.
It's like removing all the malware from your computer and it runs smoothly again.
Much faster. Yeah. Because there's all these layers of processing that just aren't there.
It's probably more similar to immediate experience.
It is. It's very close to, with maybe the only additional step of recognition. I mean, in any kind of a high-performance situation, you have to have recognition functioning so that you know what's going down.
Yeah.
You have situational awareness. But that doesn't mean there's any further processing necessary. So when people are, quote, in the zone, in the flow, or whatever you want to call it.
Most people have probably been in the flow or had some similar experience.
Yeah, something that you really enjoy doing and you do very, very well. Whatever it might be.
Yeah. And if you haven't had that, maybe just you've been in love, you know.
That's a similar experience.
That's the kind of flow.
As long as it lasts.
Yeah.
Which usually isn't very long. So we're talking about an experience of similar to flow or being in the zone, creativity, creative ecstasy, that is permanent. Not only is it long-lasting, it's eternal as far as we know.
Yeah.
There is no coming back to creating an ego. It's like once you give up creating an ego, even for a few moments, you realize, oh my God, this is it. This is the relief from all the suffering. And from that moment on, your life becomes about attaining that state permanently.
Yes, expanding that state.
Yes.
Because in the first, in the beginning, you become a stream enterer, you get a taste of it.
Yeah.
And then from there, it's about expanding it.
Once you have the eye of the teaching, once you actually see the Buddha's teaching, the Four Noble Truths, to any degree at all, then from that point on, you can't go back. You can't turn back. Once you have seen that, you are on the way to enlightenment.
Yeah.
Because once you see that, you know, this is nothing even compares to it.
From stream entry, you may fall back into the habit of creating I and mine, but then you'll be aware of it. Maybe you forget it, but then you'll suffer so much, and then you'll be like, "Holy shit!
What did I do to myself?"
Yeah. How long have I been dreaming now? You know, and you get to go back to observing experience without the I.
So it's not that the person who has no ego simply sits around and stares at the wall, you know, drooling.
No.
No, his life is still purposeful.
Can do a bunch of stuff more than the Putujana.
Actually, much more. Look at what the Buddha did. And he was way beyond even Arhat.
Yeah.
So it's not that you become like a dumb idiot. It's not that you die and just go away and that's it. Well, you do. The I and the self.
The story you created.
Yeah, all that nonsense goes away.
The person is deconstructed, but the individual is still there.
Very good. And then what that means is that you have discovered another level of experience. I'll never forget when I had my enlightenment experience in 1984. What I saw, it's not describable by words, because the minute I say what I saw or what I experienced, it brings in the assumption of self again. But there was no self. You see? So anytime we try to use language to describe that, you know, I mean, we can say it was great.
It was great.
It was fantastic. I can hardly wait to get back there. Every time I have to do stuff in the world, then I just look forward to the time when I can sit down in meditation because it's so wonderful.
It was the ultimate high.
Yes.
But without all the side effects of any kind of material I. High.
Hi. Because when one is dependent on some outside agency, that's conditional. And that means it's temporary.
Yeah.
And that means you can always go back, or you will inevitably go back into the conditioned state again. The person who is performing or playing sports or music or whatever they're doing and gets into the zone, while they're in the zone, it's like timeless, egoless,
blissful,
very absorbing, very beautiful. But then they know they have to come back again.
Because they limit that state to that identity where they're doing that special
It's
thing.
also a form of conditional existence, because in that state they have to train and prepare and rehearse and practice to get there. So all that training and rehearsal and practice is there as a condition of attaining that state. However, the Buddha's teaching is unique in that it's a deconditioning, an untraining.
Yes.
And it leads to creating that state and maintaining it indefinitely, effortlessly, and unconditionally. It doesn't require any warm-up or any special training or practice or skill.
Once you get it.
Once you get it, then you got it.
for me, I still have to load ontology and establish concentration, and even the Buddha every day he established concentration in front of himself every day.
Yes, he did. But it's the difference between, like if you have weeds growing in your garden, it's the difference between cutting off the weed at the ground and digging it up by the root.
Yeah.
If you cut the weed off at the ground, sooner or later it grows back. But if you dig it out at the root, that's it. It's over. It's finished.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, our meditation practice allows us to cut the weeds of I and self and so forth and taste that experience.
Have a selfless experience.
But then the weeds grow back again.
Yeah. Next morning, you have to cut a little bit.
Yeah. But sooner or later, you get into a position, and I know where it is. It's after the fourth jhana. Yeah. Where you can see what it takes to actually dig that thing up by the root, and then it doesn't come back. It's just that entering that fourth jhana is so difficult.
Yeah.
Well, it's complete nothingness. There's nowhere to stand. It's absolute emptiness. So, it's difficult to let go if there's any attachment to ego or self left at all, even subtly. It's really hard to let go and go into that fourth jhana. You want to roll around in the light.
Still attached to some subtle sense of self.
Fly around in the clouds.
Enjoyer of the light.
Yeah. So the meditation is only preliminary to the insight. The meditation simply gives you a point of view from which you can cognize the insight. But the insight is the thing.
Yeah. And the insight is about letting go.
It's not about doing, it's about non-doing. It's about stopping a certain kind of doing that's keeping us in this conditional state.
And the more you let go of those fabrications, the easier also concentration and attainment of the jhanas become.
Yeah. So they feed one another. They're reciprocal things.
Like me, I haven't even reached the first jhana, but I've done enough insight that I can easily attain a state of no self. Like I can walk around in the world and everything is very clear.
Well, you've practiced skills. So you have the background that you can understand what it is to concentrate and train your mind, even without jhana necessarily. With jhana, the difference is the concentration becomes so intense that you get a particular kind of pleasure, mental pleasure, causeless enjoyment that doesn't depend on any sense contact. And that allows you to weaken the identification with the bodily senses sufficiently that you undercut those assumptions that whenever I say me or I, it means my body.
Nothing you can experience outside of meditation comes near to the pleasure you get from there.
Really. That pleasure is very wonderful.
And lesser forms of enjoyment become easy to give up.
Oh, yeah. Waste of time. We've burned through half an hour of our podcast already, and we haven't even got to the book. Let's take a look at where we left off last time in Weti Muni's book, The Buddha's Teaching and the Ambiguity of Existence. We are talking about consciousness. This is a good place to segue into the discussion on consciousness. He continues from where we left off last time. As we already pointed out, consciousness, vijnana, should not be mistaken for awareness, sampajanya. Vijnana is consciousness, sampajanya is awareness. Consciousness of movement, let's say, and awareness of consciousness of movement are not the same. Notice awareness of consciousness of movement. There's an additional layer. Awareness is an additional layer on top of or just plain consciousness.
But it's not an additional covering layer. It's like zooming out in perspective.
Well, it is when you're conscious of movement, let's say, the movement is the object of your consciousness. But when you're aware of your consciousness of movement, now the consciousness has become the object. And so you have added an additional layer of abstraction. He says here, awareness involves consideration to some degree. So there is some processing in addition to direct consciousness.
But in my experience, it makes everything clear, because when I'm in one sense, it kind of blocks out all the other senses.
Right.
When you use sampajanya, when awareness of your awareness of being conscious of your experience, it kind of opens up the space.
Well, remember back in chapter 4, I think it was many podcasts ago, we talked about sati sampajanya, mindfulness and awareness.
Yes.
Okay. So mindfulness means to have a collected mind. What does that mean? It means you have some memory of your purpose in being aware. You're not just aware to be aware. You're aware with a certain purpose. Like he says here, there's some consideration. And the consideration, in the sense you're talking about there, is let me have broad situational awareness. Let me be aware not only of one sense, but of all the senses simultaneously.
And what shows up in them.
Yeah, it's just like the difference between tunnel vision and peripheral vision. You did a lot of work with that.
Yeah, for those who haven't tried peripheral vision,
Explain it.
they should definitely try it. It's like if you look at your cup of tea in front of you, you can see only the cup of tea, or you can like take a step back and you can look in the direction of the cup, and you can try to see if you stretch your arms out to the side, you can see your fingers moving if your arms are straight out to the side, and then you try to see the whole field of vision at the same time.
Yeah. And that leads to
concentration
and
awareness.
Because now you're going to be aware of things that are happening not only directly in front of you, but also off to the side. Just like when you're in high state of concentration in martial arts, you're not just looking at the guy in front of you.
You're
looking all around and hearing what's going on, smelling what's going on. You're in touch with the whole situation. Who knows? He could have 2 or 3 buddies hiding in the bushes.
That's right.
So when you're, again, to use the example of the musician, when you're playing music, you're not just aware of your instrument. You're aware of all the other instruments and how they're blending together, how the audience is responding to you, how the sound of the hall is affecting the music, and so on and so forth. There's all these other things external. This is why, for example, performing is so different from practicing. Okay, in performing, the whole purpose is to focus on exactly what you're doing, nothing else. But then in performance, there's not only your playing, there's all these other factors that enter into the experience. Just like when you're practicing martial arts, it's like there's all this other stuff that enters in. It's not just about you. It's about you in relation with everything else that's going. Right. So, awareness involves consideration. When someone is asleep, for example, we cannot say that they are unconscious. If that were so, he could not be woken out of sleep by a noise or other disturbance. But we can say that he's not aware. There's consciousness there because any sense input has some response, has some effect. Consciousness is there. You shake someone who's asleep, they wake up. But they're not aware of what's going on. It's like, huh? What? Who's that? Consciousness without awareness. So in awareness, there is some consideration of what is the situation. Situational awareness, analysis, or identification. Seeing X as X. So the necessity to differentiate between consciousness and first-order awareness means seeing X as X, identifying what's going on, has given rise to terms like unconscious, subconscious, semi-conscious. And these words essentially refer to the degree of consciousness involved in immediate experience, conscious of X, but not in awareness of the experience, conscious of X as X. That's the first layer of reflection with an X. That, oh, this is a cup of tea. This is a computer. This is a microphone.
Yeah.
This is a guy trying to punch me in the face. Whatever it is. The suttas do not speak of different grades of consciousness, such as unconscious, subconscious, etc. However, they do speak of a state where feeling and perception have ceased, and therefore consciousness has also ceased. But there is heat and vitality in the body, and so there is a return to consciousness at the time predetermined before the attainment of the state. This state is called the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling. Sanya Vedayati Nirodha Samapati. That's a mouthful, huh?
Sanya is perception, Vedana is feeling, Nirodha is cessation.
Ceasing. And Samapati is the state, or the recollection of. So when one is in deep meditation, samadhi, one goes in so deep concentration that all the doors of the senses become closed, including the mind. And there is just no awareness of anything whatsoever. This is very deep samadhi. And it's not really necessary, incidentally, for enlightenment. This is a very interesting point because, for example, in India, they have the assumption that unless you can attain this kind of samadhi, nirvikalpa samadhi, where you're not aware of anything external, you can't really attain enlightenment. But the Buddha doesn't say like that, because if you read the experience of his enlightenment, his enlightenment actually occurred after coming out of meditation.
Yes. Seeing the star pass away.
Yes. It was an insight. And there are many similar stories. I love the story of the monk who was going home at night after serving his teacher. And it was very dark outside. So he said, please give me a candle. And so the master gave the monk the candle, lit candle. And as he was going out the door, the master blew out the candle. The disciple became enlightened on the spot. It's just like the Buddha. He saw the morning star, Venus, fading out in the dawn. And when it had faded out completely, that's when he attained. So similarly, the meditation part is to prepare the mind in a certain way. And
Make
then
it ready for work.
That's right. Prepare for any type of work. And especially the kind of work that we're talking about of insight. And the actual enlightenment is a kind of insight that develops when the mind is mature, when it's in the proper state. It can't be done by an effort of will.
No.
That's the interesting thing. You cannot say, okay, now I'm going to become enlightened.
Now I'm going to have this
1, 2,
insight.
3, boom.
You can set the conditions, prepare the conditions for it.
Yeah.
That will help it arise, but you can't make it appear.
Yeah, it's just like you can dig your garden and you can pull all the weeds and, pull out all the stumps and weed and roots and stuff, and then you can prepare the soil and put the seeds in and irrigate and everything. But you can't determine when the seeds are going to come up.
Can't make them grow.
No. They come up when they're good and ready. So to us in the West, it might seem a little woo-woo, a little mystical. But actually it's just natural. There's a Zen koan, or haiku. The spring comes and the grass grows by itself. Very nice. In other words, when the mind is in the proper state, then it flowers, it blooms.
Like you can't make yourself have a good idea if you want to have an idea for a startup, for example.
Right.
You can't make the idea appear, but you can get into a creative mood and it will show up by itself.
Yeah. And there are many stories of even scientists and people like this trying to solve a difficult problem. And they work on it and work on it and work on it, and they just can't quite get it. And so they say, oh, the heck with it, and they put it down and go off and do something completely different. And one, I think it was Niels Bohr, was getting on a bus.
No, that was Einstein.
Was it Einstein?
Einstein had his big revelation.
Getting on a bus. So who knows what it was about that incident, that experience, that triggered that insight that led to his wonderful theory.
Wow.
He was getting on the bus. Maybe it was that, when you're getting on a bus and you're walking down to find your seat and the bus starts up and your body doesn't want to start up with it.
That's relative.
Yeah, very relative. Very relevant to relativity. So anyway, all puns aside. Now, as regards the essence, consciousness is negative. It cannot be seen, heard, smelled, tasted, or felt. It's like a mirror. It simply reports what's there, what's present. Consciousness does not refer to the phenomenon that is present, or even to part of the phenomenon. It is not what is present, or even a part of what is present. It is the presence of the phenomenon. Okay.
Should be said that it could include the phenomenon of space. You can be conscious of.
But space is another phenomenon. So
but it doesn't need to be like a tangible object. It can be also space.
No, that's the point. It's not, consciousness is not space.
No,
because space can be an object of consciousness as well. So certainly space has got to be there for any phenomenon that takes place.
That's the fifth element, the Akasha Dhatu.
Yeah.
And then Vijnana Dhatu is the sixth one normally.
Yeah. But the difference between consciousness and all the other elements is that consciousness never merges with any of the other elements.
No. It merely reflects.
Right. Merely shows them up. So it is only the presence of the phenomenon. Consciousness is the presence of that which is present. Just like the taste of that which is tasteful, or the sound of that which is heard.
Yeah.
See?
Shows up in consciousness.
Yes. In an immediate visual experience, for example, the thing is seen, but eye consciousness is not seen. In fact, eye consciousness is the thing that is seeing the thing that is seen. So eye consciousness is negative as regards essence. But in reflexive visual experience, eye consciousness is present. Why? Because in reflexion with an X, we are conscious of being conscious of something. Or more properly, we are aware of being conscious of something. Because this requires a recollection, pooling together of mental resources from different sources, and then looking at the whole picture.
Awareness is actually a function of consciousness.
That's right. Yes. You have to have consciousness as a precondition for awareness. Without consciousness, no possibility of awareness. Because awareness is simply a way of looking at consciousness. It's an abstraction. It's a higher level of processing of our experience.
Yeah. Instead of being in the experience, you're aware of the consciousness of the experience. Yeah.
It's just like, I don't know if this ever happens to you, but many times I'll be in a situation and doing something or saying something or whatever, and I'll become aware of myself as if looking at somebody else.
Yeah.
And it's like I know what I'm doing and I know what I'm saying and I'm still doing it volitionally, but my point of view is outside of myself instead of identified with myself. I don't know if that ever happens.
Yeah. It's not like I'm seeing myself visually outside of myself, but I get a sense of the whole room, and like it's almost like the whole thing becomes mechanical, you know?
Yes,
and you see
like
all
a
the
movie.
Other people like waiting for a reply, and then if you hold your energy in a certain way, then they react in certain ways.
It's a whole thing, isn't it?
That's a blast.
Well, it opens up a new layer of experience. A layer that isn't present when one is simply identified with the senses and consciousness.
You stop being so hung up about yourself that you become aware of the whole situation.
I can't help thinking that must give you an advantage. You know?
Yeah.
It must be a tactical advantage in any situation to be aware of the whole situation from a more or less outside point of view, external point of view, without really being hung up on just myself, I, the great self.
Instead of like just being ready with a reply whenever the other person stops talking.
I can read the next paragraph. Thus, while other things can be directly described in terms of their positive essence as this thing or that thing, consciousness cannot be so described. It can be described only upon reflexion with an X. If anything is to be described, it must be present. The thing described must be present, not consciousness. The thing must be present, at least in imagination or memory.
Which means one of the other four aggregates.
Yes, but that's being conscious of the mind. Okay, so in any case, consciousness is required for anything to be present, even the memory or the imagination of something in the past or future.
Yeah.
So, we have a situation where other things depend upon consciousness for their existence, whether in this form or that form, in our world. And that simply means that consciousness is the existential determination. Kaboom.
Punchline.
Yes, definitely. What do we mean by that?
What determines existence is consciousness. Without consciousness, no existence.
That's right. You cannot say that anything exists if there is no consciousness. Without consciousness, the world is simply blank. There's no existence. Everything is dependent on consciousness because it requires consciousness to show up. Everything else that we experience depends on consciousness. And without consciousness, they don't have any existence in our world. That's the existential determination. Consciousness determines existence. And this is going to become very important in our later discussions when we get into seeing how everything that we experience is determined by something else. Where is consciousness in the dependent origination process and all like that? We're not there yet, so we're not going to discuss that now. But consciousness is definitely one of the important steps in the process of the things that exist in our world. I think we can pretty much close this discussion, this episode of the podcast. And in the next one, we'll go ahead and start looking into what the Buddha has to say about consciousness. And meantime, be well, take care of yourselves. We'll see you next time.
Live long and prosper.
Yes.
Ayubowan.
Ayubowan.